Dr. Bjorn Lomborg and I co-wrote the article we are jointly about to present to you recently for the UK newspaper, The Telegraph, where it was also published in print and online. Dr. Lomborg, who runs a think tank in Denmark known as the Copenhagen Consensus, is, in my estimation, the most reliable commentator on the environmental stewardship front in the world, and he and his compatriots are responsible for most of the ideas in this piece. But first, a bit of an introduction. What is environmental stewardship? It is a set of conceptions and actions based on the idea that human beings are part of the natural world, not beings foreign to it, and that we have a responsibility to ensure that our short-term activities do not compromise our futures by, for example, compromising the viability of the natural systems we all depend upon. But Dr. Lomborg is no careless activist. Quite the contrary, he has done more than anyone else to examine the multitude of problems that confront us on the environmental front, while simultaneously taking into account economic necessity, the moral and practical responsibility we have to provide people with, for example, education, opportunity, and security. Dr. Lomborg and the experts in his group have conducted very careful cost-benefit analysis of a number of projects deemed by a variety of global leaders to be in the world's best interest. And they have rank-ordered such approaches by return on investment. In other words, they have attempted to determine where we might spend our money on improving the lot of the poor, to take a prime example, and do the most good in the most efficient manner possible. And that efficiency, far from being a mere practical and cold-hearted consideration, is precisely what increases the chances that any good at all will actually be done, which is a very difficult thing to manage, and that simultaneously allows us to do more good as we conserve more resources to do so. The requirement for such an analysis seems self-evident, although it is rarely done. The utility of all spending needs to be assessed regardless of amount, and that is particularly true when billions or even trillions of dollars are at stake and the fate of the very economies that sustain us hang in the balance. We are all confronted with a constant story about the catastrophe that faces the planet, particularly on the carbon front. It is simpler and, in some sense, more immediately morally rewarding to reduce the complexity of planetary management to the need to reduce our so-called carbon footprint. But the plain truth of the matter is that a multitude of troubles beset us, both economically and environmentally. We therefore require people like Dr. Lomborg to think about many issues simultaneously, to produce a plan and to help us move forward in the most beneficial manner possible. I would recommend that those of you who are truly interested in such things familiarize yourself with his work. You could start with The Smartest Targets in the World, which is a summary of the Copenhagen Consensus think tank's attempt to prioritize our action and attention in the world on the economic and environmental front. And with that, we'll turn our attention to the aforementioned Telegraph article and discuss how those who hypothetically lead us are failing to save the planet at this year's UN Climate Change Conference, known as COP27. Why 27? Because this is literally the 27th time that such a group has been convened. And as you will soon see or hear, very little has been accomplished and much time and money wasted in consequence.
Quote, "Insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results." This famous quote, often misattributed to Albert Einstein, might very well become the unofficial motto of the UN Climate Change Conference in Egypt, the 27th session of the Conference of Parties, so-called COP27.
Global carbon dioxide emissions have kept increasing since the world's nations first committed to rein in climate change at the Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro in 1992. Despite dozens of climate summits and the global climate agreements struck in Kyoto and Paris, this is the case once again in 2022, when we will collectively set a new emissions record while rich countries increasingly promise draconian cuts and then generally backtrack as they import huge amounts of oil, gas, and coal to save their citizens from energy poverty, as they have done most recently to address the current energy crisis. Most of the future emissions will come from the currently poorer countries in Asia and Africa, as they power their climb out of abject poverty.
In the previous 10 years, the world has focused more on remediating climate change than ever before. Despite this, we're not achieving anything.